Hi everyone, thanks for dialing into our little podcast here. I'm joined by our Satarla associate, Neil Morrin. Now, Neil is not only a fantastic engineer, but he's also a safety and health expert who has also delivered multiple training sessions with regards to NEBOSH being one of the main safety qualifications that you can get. So thanks, Neil, for joining us here today.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
So Neil, I was wondering just to kick off with, can you just give us a bit of a description as to what NEBOSH actually is?
Okay, so in the UK, NEBOSH is the National Education Board for Safety and Health, but it has become the go-to international standard for health and safety qualifications. So it's something that we in the UK are pretty proud of, that it's a very well-recognised qualification, and it's like a standard of competence that's easily recognisable throughout the world.
Excellent. So that sounds great for those of us who are British and certainly training people in how to pass their NEBOSH examinations, etc. abroad. But I hear that something has changed with regards to NEBOSH over the last little while. What has changed?
Yeah, so the last cohort to go through were the first to go through the big change. So NEBOSH used to be very exam heavy. So the certificate was 2 3-hour written exams and the diploma was 3. In the past, they've had a little bit of criticism that the exams were difficult to pass for the wrong reasons. So this time they've cut out one of the exams entirely for the certificate. So now there's a single exam that you have to pass, which is now being billed as more user-friendly and easier, and then there's a larger coursework component where all the health and safety side has to be addressed on a site basis, so like a site-based risk assessment.
Okay, so they've moved away from your traditional exam approach, or kind of being very heavy on that, to then ramp up on the coursework side. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So you still have to do the first exam, which is on the health and safety law side or management system side. But then the second part, which is all about the hazards and how you mitigate them in the workplace, is now being done solely by coursework. So it's a big change.
That is a big change. So how did the guys and girls at NEBOSH go about determining what sort of changes to make and how far to go with this shift into the coursework side of things?
Yeah, so I mean, NEBOSH took a really good approach to this. They actually listened to the market, they listened to industry, and they tried to find out what was actually valuable about the NEBOSH qualification to industry. So some of the criticism in the past has been that because it's very exam focused, it doesn't really reflect how you do that in the workplace. Also, NEBOSH is sort of famous for, in the past, using really specific terms in exam questions that then can be misinterpreted by people who know health and safety well, but don't know how to pass NEBOSH. And so people have traditionally failed NEBOSH because maybe their English wasn't the first language. And so some of the vocab was hard for them to understand. Or maybe after 10 years or 20 years of leaving school, they've gone out of the practice of sitting exams. It's not something we do at work very much. So NEBOSH have done the right thing. They've listened to industry and they've refocused the assessment onto a more realistic workplace setting. So the bulk of it now is supposed to be a report that you do at work for your management team. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. So you are the health and safety officer for a site, and you have to do a full risk assessment of an area of the business, or for a smaller business of the whole business, and look at all of the risks and hazards that might be there and see how you should mitigate those. So it's a good thing.
Great. So that sounds much more useful for the businesses themselves, because they're actually getting something of value, not just a qualification for their health and safety managers, for example, but also they're getting a really good quality hazard and risk assessment, for example, for their place of work. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing about NEBOSH, which has always been the good thing, is it encourages a really broad approach. So you might get a chemical engineer on a site who's very familiar with the engineering side of things and perhaps the chemical side of things, but the NEBOSH approach requires them to look at other hazards in the workplace as well. So very topical at the moment, it might be mental health, so workplace stress, and how the business is organised has to then be considered alongside the traditional things of plant failure or chemical hazards. So it causes people to be more rounded in their approach to health and safety, which is good.
Which is exactly what we need, isn't it? Because I think what we've seen certainly over in recent years is the more interconnected we can make health and safety be within the organisation, the more likely it is that we're actually going to manage those hazards and those risks. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes up very frequently if you're running big projects for clients, for example. It's at what point they consider things like the extra stress and workload on the key decision makers within that project team.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, project risk assessments, in my experience, tend to be focused on things like, are we going to deliver it on time? There might be an assessment on fatal risks or cost overruns, but there's very little upfront planning on workload and how that might impact your key people within the organisation. Because as everyone knows, we've all got busy day jobs. If you then drop a major project on top of your key staff as well, that just makes people more stressed. And it's important to assess that before you commit to the project to make sure you've got the right resources in place. It's also in the UK a legal requirement, so it's always worth keeping an eye on that.
Yeah, no, very, very useful when something is entrenched in law in terms of making it actually happen. So with these changes to the NEBOSH qualification and the exams, so I guess in the past it was fairly easy to mark those exams from a NEBOSH perspective, but now that there's this enhancement on or bigger focus on the coursework side of things, how easy do you think it is for NEBOSH to be able to mark the quality of that coursework and ensure that actually people who are coming out with the qualification are of an adequate level?
Well, the big risk with this is checking that the person that gets the qualifications is actually the person who did the coursework. With the exam, it's fairly straightforward. I've invigilated a couple of exams in the past. It's not the most exciting of jobs, but one of the things you do is check that the people in the room are the people who are supposed to be in the room. Yeah. With a coursework heavy assessment, it's much harder to check that. So NEBOSH have all the systems in place for plagiarism detection, so you can't just download someone else's report and submit it. That'll be picked up in the system. But as yet, I haven't seen how they're going to stop people at work handing it to someone else to complete, if that makes sense. So that is a risk within NEBOSH that people might slip through the net and qualify without having done all of the work themselves, which is always important in the workplace. And this is something that we do have to stress a lot. If you send someone to training, any training with a health and safety focus, when they come back to the workplace, you should check that the person has actually got some benefit from that and can demonstrate some competence because of it. A certificate is all well and good and it's a great thing to have, but it's very important within business that we actually check that these people who have certificates actually know what they're talking about. And it's a critical step in any training program that when they come back to the workplace, someone, supervisor, a manager, another health and safety person sits them down and actually checks that some of the information has gone in and that the person is more competent now than before they attended the training.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than somebody saying, oh yes, we've trained everybody, but yeah, train them in what? And has anybody actually applied any of what they've theoretically learnt to a real life situation? Definitely. So with regards to more opportunities and threats, I guess, that are posed by this change in NEBOSH. So we've talked about the potential for people to cheat by getting somebody else to do their coursework, but of course there are lots of checks and balances that can be put in place with regards to that. So that's maybe a bit of a threat. But on the positive side, actually making the qualification much more tangible and useful to an organisation immediately by this swing across to coursework rather than just learning certain phrases and being able to regurgitate the right answers that might be those phrases.
Certainly, and it opens it up more to people who perhaps haven't gone through further education or higher education route, and who in the past might well have been put off by the very exam heavy qualification. I know that talking to people, it is something that concerns them about sitting NEBOSH, especially if they are experienced in the workplace, which then perhaps arguably means that they haven't been to school for a long time and have got out of the habit of this. The good thing about this qualification now is it opens up easier routes for people to then re-qualify or get additional qualifications to improve their CV, which is a great way of capturing people who have probably got a lot of experience and a lot to give in this field, and allowing them to develop their skill set so that they can be a more rounded member of the H&S team.
Great. Any other opportunities and threats, you reckon, Neil, in terms of what this new NEBOSH poses to the world?
Well, more threats, more competent health and safety people. I know they're sometimes seen as a threat on workplaces. No, in all seriousness, from an opportunities point of view, it's a great way of refocusing the qualifications so it actually helps business. For example, part of the qualification, you are supposed to cost assess the controls you're trying to implement. Mm-hmm. So rather than it just being a pure health and safety approach, which never works in business, sorry, I'm being distracted. There is now a requirement that the controls you're trying to implement actually go through some sort of cost approach to make them more realistic. So within any health and safety system, legally, there is a requirement to do enough so far as is reasonably practicable. And that reasonably practical statement includes a degree of cost assessment. So it makes it a more business realistic approach. So rather than just saying, wouldn't it be great if we could all drive beautiful cars with 1,000 airbags that self-drive themselves, or rolling mines over to completely automated processes, there is still that step, which means that, you know, this has to not bankrupt the business, and it has to be viable to the business, and it has to be a more rounded decision-making process. I think it's important for health and safety people to understand that better, so that when they're trying to persuade their managers to do things from a health and safety point of view, they can use a more rounded argument. I know sometimes health and safety people get criticised for not being commercial enough, and understanding the footprint of the business and what is actually realistic and viable for that business. So all health and safety people should be looking out for things that are free. In any workplace, you can normally find ways of improving risk management and health and safety fairly cost effectively. And it's important that we look at those things. It doesn't mean we shouldn't spend money on health and safety, we obviously should, but it needs to be a better cost managed approach sometimes, rather than the somewhat overly optimistic thinking that some people go with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that certainly I often see with people who are have deep expertise in the world of health and safety, often when new controls are perhaps being proposed, the business case revolves around the threat that is being managed, so that potential downside that's being managed, rather than maybe thinking broader and saying, well, actually, if we redesign this particular area of the plant or this particular bit of the business, actually the increase in production that we could get. And so therefore the value add from a commercial aspect, as well as keeping people safe, etc., being rolled in. From a personal perspective, I've always had more success with selling those sort of controls when couched in a broader business case to senior management than just saying this is critical for health and safety. Because whilst health and safety, of course, is really important, actually there is a price tag that comes with it. Absolutely.
And if you get your health and safety approach right, it's all about increasing control. So identifying risks to the business and effectively managing them. It is just good business practice. And to do that right, you need health and safety people who are aware of what business is, and at least beginning to become commercially astute, so that they can make a reasoned, balanced argument to management that's much more likely to be heard than perhaps just standing on a soapbox preaching, which is never an approach that gets you very far in the modern world. So, yeah.
Great. So final question, and this is back to NEBOSH again. So as someone who knows NEBOSH inside out, upside down, having trained people in it for years, and also having trained the first cohort of people to have gone through the new NEBOSH, what do you think the future outlook is for NEBOSH as a qualification?
I think it's still very strong. It's still got I think it's perhaps following this even got a better international reach. So I've had the pleasure of teaching NEBOSH in Dubai I think we had 8 delegates from 7 different countries. And on the old system, that was very hard because of the amount of technical vocab that you need to get across to people. So the new approach will enable a much better international reach, which I think will only strengthen the brand. So I know they're working on Arabic, they're working on French. So they're definitely expanding their reach, which will be great. And I'm sure they'll manage to maintain the quality of the certificate, which then means that this can only be a positive thing going forwards. And we can really start to build on this from an overall global approach to health and safety. So I have worked in a number of different places around the world. When you do find people with the right qualifications who understand it in the right way, it does really help to have that then shared approach and shared understanding to what we're trying to achieve. So I think as long as NEBOSH do the right things and keep doing the right things, I think they'll have a brand to look after for a long time yet.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Neil, and look forward to hearing more from you soon. Thank you.
Likewise.